Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Kitab, Books and Discussion. We have with us Vandana Kohli, whose book Hinge, Rediscovering Emotional and Mental Wellness has recently been released. And welcome, Vandana, to Kitab, Books and Discussion. We have this series of programs over the year where we pick up recent books mostly and invite the author for a discussion. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me over, Dr. Pushkar.
A very quick introduction, Vandana, before I begin with the questions. Vandana Kohli is a filmmaker and writer with an interest in the human mind, behavior, and efficiency. And she has served twice on the jury of the National Film Awards and has been a member board of governors at the National Institute of Fashion Technology. Vandana divides her time between Mumbai and Delhi. And is this your first book, Vandana?
This is my first book, Pushkar. I wrote a column for many years with the Week magazine, it was called Mindscape. It was on mind, emotion, psyche. But this is really my first book, and it's a result of many years of observation and research and all of that.
Okay. The first question I have is, obviously, I mean, the title says more than a little bit about the content, but what really is the book? What is the book really about? And the second leading question is, of course, who is it for? I mean, something like emotional and mental wellness concerns us all. And of course, I mean, this will be a later question too. At this time, when, of course, the kind of uncertainty that came with COVID-19 early on, some of that has gone down, but still we are living in an age of uncertainty. So what did you have in mind when writing this book, and who were you writing it for at the time that you were writing it? Who do you think would be reading? Who did you think would be reading the book?
Well, Doctor, as you rightly said, Pushkar, the book is really for everybody. It's not an academic book. It's written simply. That's not to say that it isn't researched deeply. It's a result of 20 years of work, a lot of which I draw from my professional research for the films that I've made. I've made one on depression, which was the first film on depression in the country in an urban Indian context in 2002, 2003. And subsequently, I made another film, which was an international documentary on anger called The Subtext of Anger, for which I traveled around. I did extensive interviews in India, in the UK, and all across the US with the world's leading experts. And apart from that, I've written a journal, Observed Patterns of the Mind. So the book is therefore a culmination of all of that. It draws from all of that. It's, as I said, it's written for everybody. It's written in a style which should be accessible to everybody and is accessible to everybody. What is the book about? As the title suggests, it's called Hinge. So we go through certain emotions, which I refer to as dark emotions, which are difficult emotions for us to ride the arc of. To name a few: depression, anger. Anger, in fact, I feel is often the root that even leads us to depression, and anxiety as well, and fear. And Hinge is really about finding your way through those emotions so that you can hinge yourself back to a sense of a centered, stable, yet dynamic flow. And how do we do that? So the book is divided into 3 sections. The first one is called normal, because it's difficult to define normal. It's difficult to understand normal, and normal is different for for a lot of us. So it delves into what are the questions and what are the parameters of normal as we understand it. The second section is called unhinge or unhinged, which is the emotions, therefore, that can unhinge us, take us away from, fragment us within, or tear our narrative. And those would therefore include, as I mentioned, depression and anger as well. How do they work? Well, how do they impact us? What is the arc that we ride when we are experiencing those emotions? with a view that if we understand them better, then we are in a better position to use their energy for maybe more constructive, put it to more constructive use. And the third section of the book is called Hinge, which is that once we go through these emotions, whether we go through them ourselves or whether our loved ones go through them or people we know at work or colleagues go through them, we understand them better. How do we hinge ourselves back to a sense of that stable yet dynamic center, which gives us a sense of flow again? And if I may add, if you will see the chapters under Hinge, which is the final section, they touch the different layers that we have within us. So it touches the layer of thought. How do we use, where do we center ourselves? What approach do we take so that we are able to resolve the stuff that comes to us, and at the same time use the instinctive warmth of our heart, yet remain functional and effective in a practical, on the practical plane. So that's what Hinge is really about, rediscovering emotional and mental wellness.
Vandana, the way I see it, and I think it's broadly, generally true. We have a whole range of emotions: joy, anger, anxiety, stress, and some of those emotions are something natural, right? It's natural to be angry. It's natural to be, one thing or the other. And yet, something as natural as anger or joy, people talk about how we can manage and control our emotions and why it matters. Now, somebody might say, don't be too happy about things, because the moments of happiness or periods of happiness will normally be interspersed with anxiety or anger or some other stress or some other emotion. Now, it's one thing to say manage and control your emotions, and people actually say you can do it. How often does that happen? How often or how easily are we able to manage and control our emotions?
So I don't really advocate controlling your emotions. I do advocate or suggest rather processing one's emotions. This book comes from a certain from lived experience. It advocates a path or one of many paths, which I think is effective in helping one process those emotions. There's nothing wrong with having anger and experiencing anger. Anger is a natural emotion. We are hardwired with it. So anytime we sense a sense of threat, we will be sparked to anger, and we should be sparked. Anger should spark in us, because that's how we would be able to protect ourselves from that threat. Having said that, in the times that we are living, the milieu that we are living in, it seems to me that the systems around us are driving us more and more towards stress and anger. It could be the technology that is driving us, because technology the tools that we have is forcing us to work at the pace of the mind. We are ignoring our physical, we are ignoring our emotional rhythms. We don't have time to process it. And so, it's stress, chronic stress can lead to chronic anger. It's the same reaction within us, the stress response, which is the fight or flight response. And when you're chronically stressed or you're stressed all the time, there are enough neurotransmitters that your body's pumped with, the brain pumps that with your body with it, that a small prick can lead to a disproportionate outburst of anger. So, it's one wheel turns another wheel. And I do feel that given the times that we're living in, it is important for us to be able to negotiate the inner more and more. It is almost imperative for us to understand what is going on within as well, because any kind of resilience to deal with anything external comes from your inner fabric. And if the inner fabric is in disarray and does not even know where to root itself, where it doesn't even know what is close to the center, forget the center, then we are just adding exponentially to the problem. So when it comes to anger, there is an entire chapter on anger. How does it impact us? Why does it impact us? I don't advocate controlling it. And I think that if you need to express it, you express it. But when we are stuck in anger chronically, then there is a problem. And that problem is not just limited to us. It affects everything and everybody around us. So Hinge actually therefore tries to describe the inner experience as lucidly as possible, so that one is in a better position or is better informed in then choosing to do what you want with the energy of that emotion or with the arc of that emotion.
I quite like the term processing one's emotions rather than think of managing or regulating or controlling it. But it's also true that we process our emotions or we learn to process our emotions almost naturally, most of us, given the context. So what I'm simply getting at is sometimes we may not display happiness or anger the same way we do, we try to express a sense of calm in the public sphere. Whereas other emotions, the more intense emotions, we are more likely to express them, say, in a workplace with those who are, below us, and not so much with those who are above us. We again process our emotions differently at home. Again, it depends on who is around. So eventually, what I'm getting at is that context matters, right? Even for that natural expression of any emotion.
Certainly, absolutely. In fact, anger comes more easily in its expression, as you said, towards people who are weaker or vulnerable, or in our circuit. So whether it's juniors at work or colleagues,
Yeah.
or it's at the home with the children or the spouse or even your mom. I mean, that is true. Absolutely true. So I'm in agreement with you, Pushkar. I mean, I agree that it's easier. The context does matter. Anger is used as a presentation very often. You know that you can be angry, so you're angry. When it comes to anger, though, I have two short points to make. One is that when you express anger as anger, there is a difference between the emotion and the expression of anger.
Yeah.
When you express anger as anger, you're putting other angry wheels into motion. And if one is aware of the consequences of that, then it's fine. Then please go ahead.
Yeah.
The second thing about anger is it's okay to, a lot of people use anger as a presentation. They're not really angry, but they sometimes pretend to be angry because it takes your work ahead. That's different. We're not talking about that. We're talking about when you are in the grip of anger. Because more often than not, the root that drives you to anger, what drives one to anger is the fear of losing control. And when we fear to lose control, we're actually trying to control something by being out of control. Because when you are angry, you're out of control. So that doesn't help, number one. Number two, when we are angry, there is a whole physiology of anger. The brain is sparking the body with various neurotransmitters, with testosterone, with all kinds, with adrenaline, which is all right if it's short, if the body is spiked with all of that, and then you calm down. But if you're riding anger constantly and you're stuck in it, it affects mind, emotion, psyche, body to such an extent that there's lost potential. You're just caught in just dealing with this inner anger, with this rage. And that's losing potential. That's not helping anybody. It's not helping the person who's experiencing it. And sometimes those loops in the brain, those circuits become chronic. So it's involuntary. If one is so accustomed to losing one's anger and doesn't really feel that it has to be processed or is not looking for another way of expressing it, then more often than not, those circuits in the brain become deeper and deeper. Those grooves become deeper and deeper, and usually are the first ones to spark. And that is detrimental for everybody, starting with the individual, himself or herself. So Hinge discusses it. It's a series of essays on various emotions and their impact. And like I said in the third section, Hinge talks about how do we even begin to resolve? How do we resolve these emotions? You talked about joy on one hand. You talked about anger or sadness or grief on the other hand. You talked about managing. Hinge actually presents its case in more and advocates being or looking for a center rather than a sense of balance. Balance always gives us this image of standing on one foot precariously trying to balance, or balance yourself on this thin line. And Hinge doesn't talk of that at all. In fact, I don't think that's what I mean by balance when I talk about it. It's balance is more about being acquainted with this end of the spectrum and understanding what the effects are, being acquainted with that end of the spectrum and understanding how that works, and finding a point where one is able to process and be functional with both, so that one is empowered and not weakened by either. A good thing taken to fault can weaken us. Too much joy or too much pleasure or too much success also, is detrimental. So the last chapter in Hinge is center, because it advocates that shift. It's a shift in approach, I think. Often the externals are unchanged. The whole journey is not just the external or not just the internal. It is the interplay between both and what we do with it.
Vandana, we tend to see or categorize the whole range of emotions. We say X emotion, anger. It's particularly, I didn't want to again get back to anger, but we see certain emotions as positive and certain emotions as negative. Where the fact seems to be that anger is an emotion which can motivate people to do sometimes, towards ambition. You are angry, frustrated about something, and you decide to do something about it. It motivates you to action. Now, that action itself can be positive, right? So similarly, if somebody is content and happy, then that person is not going to be particularly ambitious. Want to do things because you are quite content with what you have, which is a good thing. But on the other hand, it's sort of this kind of a person will be often lacking in motivation. So my sense is that perhaps the positive and the negatives we associate with each of these emotions. Is that an incorrect way to deal with emotions, to process?
There's like I said, a good thing can weaken you. In my understanding, I don't think there is anything that is right or wrong. I think there's either stuff that can empower you or there's stuff that can weaken you. And so actually everything is of use. Anger is of use as well. As long as one is not gripped in that, is not out of control. And I agree with you completely that, the power of anger can be transformed towards positive change. That's what actually anger is meant to do. It's supposed to drive us. In fact, it's supposed to alert us to injustice, which is why it's hardwired in us. So that you are advocating that you use the energy of anger and transform it to be able to move on or to do something, so that absolutely. So in that sense, the energy of anger is already transformed. When you're able to say that, I'm angry about this and I'm going to do something about this, and you do it in a way which is not leading to more violence or not leading to more anger, but is done in a way which affects change. Amazing. That's what it is meant for. The Hinge in no way, and neither am I in any way, advocating that you choose this over this is all bad, this is all good. Not at all. It is such a complex web. Emotions and their energies and how we understand them and how we react to them how we choose. All Hinge is saying is that this is the arc, and this is the power of the emotion. If you understand it, if we understand it, instead of reacting mindlessly, we may be in a position to respond to it and put its energy to use. So certainly it's not all black, it's not all white, this is not all good and that is not all bad. That would be a very simplistic way of looking at emotions or the inner world in context of the outer.
Vandana, the blurb of your book begins with, we characterize this era as, and almost all of us use this expression, era of remarkable change and uncertainty. Now, we are aware of some of those changes that are taking place. I mean, technology certainly, environment certainly. We have had rains in Goa every month. I know you talk to anyone, everyone says "Mausam badal raha hai," that kind of thing. So the point I'm trying to make is this: that some of these changes we are aware of, or we actually talk about them, know that they are taking place. But changes that we are not aware of, even they may be impacting us more indirectly, just because we do not consciously recognize those changes. Or even if we recognize that, for example, technology has changed so much over the last 10 years, 20 years, but we do not recognize the extent to which it has affected us, or the extent to which it is affecting our emotions, right? So could you highlight some of the main changes that you see have been taking place over the last 2 decades in particular, and how they are contributing to out? Many people said that, well, it won't be long before we have a vaccine. And so there was also an element of certainty going about it. So many people said, no, it'll take a while, this will happen, that will happen. But then we have a vaccine, it's not absolutely certain how effective and so on and so forth. But the point is, you have change, you have continuity, you also have uncertainty as well as growing certainty in some ways, right? Could you highlight some of these areas, I mean, to which your book tries to respond?
Well, actually, Hinge is, I think, what Hinge advocates is something that should be of use, or I would hope is of use, given any era and given any external circumstance. Today it's COVID, which has led to uncertainty. Tomorrow it'll be something else. Day after it'll be something else. Hinge recommends a certain inner shift, as I said, to be in a position to negotiate whatever the outer is bringing in a way which can therefore be more constructive for myself or for you or for anybody else who finds value from the book. That's what I hope it does. What are the changes that one has noticed? Several. I can say for a fact that we are more. Why are we more and more stressed? Because our minds are overworking. We are interfacing with a screen has increased many fold. We are using our bodies less and less, and our bodies are designed to move. So inherently there is a change. How does that impact us? In several ways, apart from the physiology of it. I think it leads to less resilience. Because things are coming at us instantaneously, we are using those parts of the brain which are meant for instant reactions. And so we are more and more impatient. If it takes 20 seconds to log on to a screen or a call or to open a window, we've abandoned it because our attention span has decreased to, there is hardly any attention span left. So even as we speak, we have changed. And so especially the youngsters, I remember a neuroscientist telling me that we are creating a new species even as we speak. And I think he's right. I think one other thing where we've changed so dramatically is, when everything is on a screen, there is very little memory. And integrity, to my mind, is based on memory. So for instance, if Dr. Pushkar had done me a kind turn 2 months ago, and when I have a sense of memory, I will remember it. And I will take that forward in my wholesome understanding of Dr. Pushkar. But if I have no memory, because I'm not in the habit of using my memory, there can be hardly be a sense of integrity. So I think actually this technology is affecting us extremely, very, very profoundly, not always in a good way. And I'm concerned, my own concern is for the younger generation. It's also a world that we will grow old in. And which is why Hinge, which is why I wrote Hinge. Because to my mind, it is one way to be able to process the uncertainty that is coming from the outside and will continue to be uncertain because of the pace at which it is changing. And just to give you one last point on that, I was reading an interview with one of the founders of the internet, and he advocated that if we have photographs or we have pictures which are of value to us, we should print them. We must print them, because he says technology is changing so quickly that very quickly there will not be our files. The current technology will not be able to read the files or the format that we saved those photographs in. So he says print them. So I see ourselves going back in a way from where we came, a full cycle perhaps which started about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I think give it another 10, 15 years and we would have completed a lot of that cycle, coming back to things that you and I grew up with. That this is the best thing to eat. This is how to eat it. If you want to draw nourishment from it, this is the amount of movement that we must have in the day. This is the amount of screen time that we must not have. We must regulate it and all that. So I did meander on your question because it is such a broad question. But yes, I think that we have changed tremendously. We will continue to change, and therefore the need more and more to be acquainted with your own person. If I, for myself, am more acquainted with what are the movements within me, and it's a practice, then probably I'm in a better position to negotiate what is coming at me without blindly and thoughtlessly and mindlessly reacting to it and adding to the problem, rather than being a part of the solution in any way.
Vandana, this is a slightly, we're still going to be talking about emotions, but in a slightly different approach. Does belief in God or being religious, broadly speaking, how helpful is it for people to deal better with their emotions, including depression or any other different kinds of mental stress? Does belief in God or being religious help? It seems to be the case that there is growing body of research that not just on spirituality, but even blind belief in something above us, God, is very, very helpful. What do you think? What is your view on that? On the role of God or religion, for individuals, for families, for communities who are God-fearing, God-believing, God-fearing not necessarily, but who have strong beliefs, religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs.
I think it's very helpful actually. I would though make a distinction. Science and the spiritual quest at some point meet in trying to find a primary mover. So, we are saying God, somebody else would say something else, but a primary mover to everything that moves, whether it's the physical universe, whether it's the internal, whether it's mystical, whether it's beyond that. My personal take on this, Pushkar, is that, science doesn't currently have the tools to to find and explore and determine the subtlest of vibrations at the moment. I know that we have become more and more reductionist. We do have the tools that break down things more and more. But I don't think we will find a God particle, because I don't believe God is a particle. That's, of course, my own view and a limited view. But your question about having some kind of faith or some kind of belief in a higher power, is that helpful? I personally believe it is, provided that we have not abdicated our responsibility towards the change that we can affect either externally or internally. As long as we have put out the best we can in terms of the effort that we're making outside, as well as within. The whole quest of Hinge is to bring the inner to light as well, the inner movements to light, not the inner in some fluffy way, but the inner in a practical way. If I understand what is going on within me, I'm probably in a better position to make use of that energy, and also to negotiate, as I said before, the inner and the outer. So I think it does help to have a belief in something that is greater than us, because sometimes you have put out the best you can, and yet you don't see the results that you want. And so to be able to surrender that and not get frustrated about it is a very useful tool, extremely useful. At the same time, it is also a dangerous tool, because it can make us complacent, and it can depress, it can make us, it can just, we can surrender in a way which is actually disempowering us. So that is something to watch out for. Apart from that, as I was speaking, I got another thought, but I must confess that I can't remember it anymore. So these are my limited thoughts on it. If it comes back to me, I'll share it with you. Oh, yes, if I may. So,
Go ahead.
Yes, if I may. So, one other thing is that the modern outlook and approach is that our lives have begun and our lives will end, and that's it. It's a very linear approach. Well, it's the ancient civilizations, they could be any of them, you take any of them, had regard our movements as more cyclical rather than linear. I think that is very useful as well. So for instance, our belief, and I use this, I've brought this into the discussion often when I've done talks on understanding and managing anger. If, for instance, somebody has been rude and angry and has humiliated me, the one tool that I find effective is, I think to myself, instead of reacting, because that's the first thing that you want to do, you want to react, and then over time you realize that that's not helping. One approach that has helped me is, I think to myself, I must have, perhaps in some other time, in some other space, in some other dimension, been rude to this person. And so it's come full circle back to me. And if that is the case, and if this person, it's just something that I have put out in some other dimension and it's come back to me, then we're quits. And if that is not the case, and this person is this anger is originating from this person, then, well, this person will have to deal with the consequences of that at some point. I do not have to engage. I don't have to. I can choose not to engage. And I find that a very, very useful and effective tool. So if any of your beliefs, the long and short of it is that if any of your beliefs, if any of your experiences, or your understanding of things, whether they are, as I said, a primary mover, or whether it's something else, is helping you to negotiate something in a better way, is helping you deal with it, is making you calmer, is making you more collected, is making you stronger. And stronger, again, is a word that we can discuss at length, but I mean it in a simple way. Then please use it. Please make use of it. To each his own. As long as the practice is constant, or tries to be constant, as long as we don't abdicate responsibility and effort.
Thank you, Vandana. Very, very nicely put. At this point, before we go to the last couple of questions, our attendees. We have a few, and if they have any questions, now's the time. And I'll ask one more question, and in the meanwhile, you can post your questions and we'll take a look, and Vandana could answer those questions. Vandana, other than anger, another emotion which often comes to mind is that, which is almost sometimes, which is unbearable, is that of loss, is it not? I mean, and we feel that loss, especially the passing away of a loved one, but also at, the sense of loss can be felt for all kinds of reasons, right? How does one deal with loss? How does one process loss? We all think that, there are people who break down. There are people who show no emotion. Again, it's how, clearly they are processing loss in a different way. But again, it's a very strong emotion, is it not? And usually tends to last longer than perhaps other emotions. As a rule. I don't know what the research on that says, which are the emotions which tend to last longer. But my sense is that loss would be right up there. The sense of loss sometimes doesn't go away for a long, long time. Anger, happiness, all these other emotions, they would often come and go. But loss is something which remains with us. Is that true?
I think so. And I think that's a very difficult question to answer, that how do you deal with loss? I think we all process it differently. It is probably the most difficult one to process and to deal with. And here is where actually I find what you asked in the earlier question, I find it most useful. That the belief that, okay, there is a greater design than what I can see, I think is of great use. Also, the cyclical approach, that this is not the end of something. This is just one point in the cycle. And who knows, I will find, this essence which was in this person again. So that hope, which comes from a certain system of belief, is very useful. Of course, the immediate dealing with loss is really, really difficult. And like you said, it lingers for such a long time. So it's a difficult one to handle. If we talk about how the book approaches it, I think the book talks about dark and light in terms of dark emotions or emotions that can disempower us, as well as those which can empower us. Or how do we use both of them? How do we put both to use? I think that's probably a more appropriate way. In a way where our sense of flow is not obstructed to a point where we are debilitated. So I would hope that there are some pointers in being able to deal with such difficult emotions from Hinge. But yes, most certainly, I think loss is one of the most difficult ones. I would imagine even more difficult than anger to deal with.
I have a last question coming up, and then I'll of course ask you to, make say anything else that you would like to say about the book itself. And the last question really is about, again, going back to uncertainty. While people had been writing about the coming pandemic from about 20 years ago, since SARS at least, there have been people who have been saying, the next pandemic will be bigger and worse and so on and so forth. But it was still something, once it arrived, it was something unexpected for most of us. And what it has done to our emotional and mental health is something we'll find out in the coming years, I think, because at one level, we are still dealing with it, right? We are still negotiating, processing, the changes that have come about. I mean, under normal circumstances, you would be here in Goa at the International Center, and we would be discussing the book in one of the halls or out in the open. The weather is beautiful right now. And instead, here we are. I mean, and that's a change. That's something which has been, which has happened because of the pandemic. But the point is this: is there any way of knowing as of now, even before more and more research comes out, what the pandemic has done to us? One of the things surely would be that from now on, everyone is going to write into their future plans when they think of the script, looking the next 10 years, they'll put something called uncertainty there. What do you think?
Yes, you're right. Uncertainty, the pandemic has certainly done that. It's upended a lot of lives. It has changed the way we function. I was awful on media, this kind of discussion on Zoom calls and all. I would, of course, any day prefer meeting in person or speaking on the phone than speaking through this tool. But this tool has proven to be very helpful. Absolutely, we should be. The thing is, though, you see, uncertainty should not be a scary word in our minds, Pushkar. If it makes us anxious and apprehensive even before it is here, then clearly there's some work that needs to be done for each of us within, and that's what Hinge tries to do. That's what the book tries to do. That this is how it's moving. How do we find our way? In a sense, with a sense of gathered flow. It's not even about being stuck at one point and trying to process everything, because that can become extremely heavy and weighty and pull us down. But how are we able to move on in a mindful way? And mindful, of course, is a word that is used so often now. How does it feel? How do we gather that so that we are effective? How do I not kill the warmth of my heart and yet remain efficient and effective in what I want to do? And that's what the book addresses, which is precisely because there is so much uncertainty around us, and that uncertainty is only going to continue to grow. So I think each of us has to choose, what do we want to cling on to, and what should we let go of, so that we are not weighed down and not pulled down. There's no point saying I'm that this is how my life is to be, and this is exactly how I'm going to keep it, and resist everything else. In fact, the one word that I can distill down any kind of emotional or mental not illness, but if you feel emotionally or mentally unwell, is resistance. It is when we resist something that there's a problem. Either we're resisting change, or we're resisting, and often that resistance is just in our own minds. So if somebody says, I'll give you a work example. If somebody says, this task needs to be done, and the first thought is one of resistance, there's a problem. That means there's clearly something within that needs to be processed, so that instead of all that energy that is going in resisting something and then finding an excuse or saying something that will keep one from doing it, it's just easier to move on and do it. Because when one person resists, there is a chain of resistances all around. And that is such a waste. So not to say that we all don't do that, not to say that that is not our lived experience, but to say that that is something to flag. And therefore, that is something to work on. And that can happen only if we are aware of it. So this is a toolkit. And some things one can take at some point in time. You can take something else at another point in time. Not everything may would seem usable to one person given their own experience at one point in time. But it's a toolkit. I'm hoping that anyone, like I draw from it all the time. Sometimes, some days this works for me, some days that works for me, and that sense of dynamic movement, that sense of that spectrum to be able to work within is equally important. There's no point saying, I'm going to walk this path and be rigid about it. No. But at the same time, how are you flexible without having to compromise on something that may be inherently very dear to you? So that's what Hinge tries to talk about and raise and explore. That's the crux of the exploration that Hinge leads you into.
Vandana, we have a question from Rohan Lobo, who's joined us. The question is, how does one deal with pain of financial kind or personal or any other kind of breakdown in life? And because one tends to resort to anger towards loved ones, knowing and even while knowing that your actions are hurting your loved ones. Does Hinge have any answer to these kinds of situations?
Yes, absolutely. There is it breaks down certain emotions for the sake of us, for us to understand them better, precisely so that we are not so helpless in the face of them or under their spell or under their grip. So Hinge does offer that, offer some light, throw some light on it, which I hope would be of use to you. I think one thing to ask off the cuff is when we are angry and when we are constantly angry as the only way, or as the only reaction to grief or the only reaction to being out of control, is at some point we have to say there is another way. And the second is that we have to ask, is this helping? Is this really helping? If it is not helping, then we need to find another way. So yes, I would think Hinge would certainly throw some light on this.
Thank you, Vandana. Any last remarks before we end?
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak about my book, and thank you for all your questions. Very broad questions. I do hope that I've been able to represent the book as well as my thoughts, and thank you for giving me the opportunity, Dr. Pushkar.
Thank you, Vandana, and thank you to everyone who joined in today for this 45-minute session. I think we ended more or less the time frame that I had in mind. So I look forward to having you in Goa sometime in the future when things seem to be more regular. We would have liked to do a physical program, except that we did one a couple of weeks ago and very few people turned up. So that has been very discouraging. So I guess we'll continue with webinars for some more time in the foreseeable future. Once again, thank you, Vandana, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.